The reason they like reading my stuff is that I've always got real life examples to prove what I'm saying.
There's a lot of good people that listen to this podcast.
Other than God and my family, deer hunting would be next in line on my list of priorities.
From the bottom of our hearts, it's just fantastic and awesome to have the support that you guys are getting.
People ask me about expandable broadheads and love swings.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Osseo Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Well, welcome everyone to the Chasing Giants podcast, episode 171 with Don Higgins. I'm Terry Peer. We're brought to you by Osseo Gear. It's the holiday weekend, and Don Higgins is on vacation. I always love it when Don goes on vacation because he doesn't like to go anywhere.
No, I travel enough with my work as a consultant that I'd just as soon stay home. That'd be a vacation for me, but I make the family happy and spend quality time with them. We go on vacation once a year. This is it.
So last year, I think you were at the beach. Where are you at this year?
This year we are in northern Michigan. We was in Mackinac Island for the last 3 days. And then we moved down, I can't even remember the name of the place I'm at. some resort town on the lake, on the shores of Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
And by the time that people hear this, though, I'm going to be back home. So hope everybody has a great weekend this weekend, Memorial Weekend, but I'm spending mine in northern Michigan.
Yeah. We're actually recording on Friday night because of the travel schedule that both of us have. And honestly, the next couple weeks are going to be pretty crazy traveling. I leave for, I do a full whirlwind around the state of Ohio, and I think I'm going to be recording next week from Findlay, where I'm going to be all weekend. So you just have to bear with us. We're either going to be in a condo bedroom like Don is or in a hotel room maybe the next couple of weeks.
Well, we'll make the most of it one way or another.
Well, I want to dig into it. There's a couple key topics that we want to talk about this week. First thing is, I apologize to everybody for the technical error. We teed up this Biofarm segment with Wayne Keller last week, and I learned a very important lesson on Adobe Premiere that when two files are named the same, one overwrites the other when you put it into your storyboard. So unfortunately, the first version that got uploaded had a double segment with Kevin Miller versus having that Biofarm. So we're going to do our best to have that on here this week. If not, we'll get it next week. And then we got a new property with another Biofarm person coming up that we want everybody to hear about next week. So we got a couple good properties we want to get in, but my apologies to everyone, especially Biofarm, for missing that posting last week due to a technical error. The other thing that kind of got a bunch of feathers ruffled was the question that came in about the clover and mowing the clover. We got all kinds of engagement about that. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. I believe one of the listeners submitted questions talk specifically about that, so we're going to hold that. But Don, this time of year we spend hours and hours and hours answering questions about herbicide. And I think that we haven't done a good job. We try to talk about different types of herbicides, but maybe for the beginner, can you break down the difference between what we call a contact herbicide and then the other types so that people, I guess let's just go back to herbicide 101 and how they work and maybe talk about some examples of each of those.
Yeah, the chemicals we're going to be using work either one of two ways. The contact herbicides will work by making you spray that herbicide on the plant, on the weed you want to kill, and it will kill that weed. A residual or a pre-emergent herbicide works in the soil to prevent weeds. So, people get really confused. I know the questions come in daily. There's not a day goes by that I don't answer multiple herbicide questions. And I know you're doing the same, Terry. But, you can spray a residual or a pre-emergent herbicide on a growing plant, and more than likely, it's not going to hurt that plant whatsoever. The plant's never going to know it was sprayed. The key with the residual is you prevent the weeds from ever happening. And I don't think people realize that. And the other thing they don't realize is a contact herbicide, for the most part, is most of them anyway, glyphosate, for example, it's not going to do anything on the soil. I get people ask me all the time, well, if, I spray my weeds and with glyphosate, how long do I have to wait before I can plant anything? They're thinking that herbicide gets in the soil and it's going to prevent weeds from coming. That's not how glyphosate works at all. So you need to know the chemical you're using, how it works. Is it a contact herbicide that kills the plants it's sprayed on, or is it a residual that works in the soil to prevent weeds? And when it comes to food plotters, we've got the mindset, or a lot of us have the mindset that you go out and you plant your plot, and then there's some chemical that you're able to spray over the top of anything you plant, and it's going to kill the weeds only and not harm your crop. And that's just not the case at all. I think, especially when it comes to soybeans and corn, you need to prepare your soil with a residual herbicide, either right before you plant it or immediately after planting, to prevent weeds. I know a lot of guys are going to like Enlist soybeans or dicamba soybeans or something besides a Roundup Ready or glyphosate tolerant soybean, because there's been a lot of weeds become resistant over the years to glyphosate. And you're way better off to prevent those weeds from ever coming on, so you don't have to spray them. And you do that with a residual herbicide. And we've talked about it before. I mean, there's a number of herbicides, residual herbicides for soybeans that work great. And then there's a number that work great for corn. And, some of those will work on other crops as well. For example, atrazine. That's a good herbicide, pre-emergent or residual herbicide for corn, but it'll also work on switchgrass. So it will not affect that switchgrass seed, and it will grow even if it's been sprayed with atrazine. And, a lot of questions we get are people will say, can I spray? And then they throw out some trade name that I've never heard before say that can I spray this on my Roundup Ready soybeans? Well, I don't even know what that chemical that they're spraying is. And so, with so many different chemical companies out there, and each company they may be selling a very similar or even exactly the same chemical as another company, but they got a different name for it. And, so those questions are very difficult for you and I to answer. What it really comes down to is the active ingredient. You need to look at the active ingredient in that chemical instead of the trade name. But that's kind of a quick overview of two different ways that two different herbicides will work.
Yeah, and you have a lot more experience with chemical programs than I do, and I don't even want to begin to claim that I know what I'm talking about to a deep level. But speaking of residuals, they work in different ways. I guess what I'm trying to say is different things will activate a residual in the ground. Sometimes you need water or rain to actually activate the chemical in the soil, whereas a contact herbicide, you don't necessarily want rain, while you're spraying, or you want a little bit of time before it rains. But I guess with some residuals, you could spray right before rain and it'd be a good thing. So I guess, in the 101, I think we really need to step back and look and explain to people the difference between residual and contact herbicides. Obviously, the contact herbicides are more familiar to people because it's, generic versions of Roundup and 2,4-D. But it's, we just get burned up all week, every week this time of year, just, and I get it. People are worried. They've put all this work into their property, seed, fertilizer. They don't want to kill it with a herbicide, just trying to take care of weeds.
Mm-hmm. And the thing to backtrack a little bit, the thing you got to remember with a residual herbicide, one that works in the soil to prevent weeds, it's only going to work for a certain period of time. And how long is going to vary based on weather conditions. The more rain you get, the more that chemical is going to be diluted and washed away,
Right.
and it's going to start losing its effectiveness. And so that really comes into play for folks that are going to want a double crop. They're going to want to overseed maybe their soybeans or their corn with something like Deadly Dozen or Plot Topper in the fall. If there's still some residual herbicide in that soil working, it can prevent that second crop from ever germinating.
Right.
So that's something to keep in mind. Most of the time when you're using a chemical, you're going to want to stay towards the maximum recommended rate. The reason a lot of weeds became resistant to glyphosate was a lot of farmers were using the minimum rates, to save money. If you're spraying thousands of acres and you go from spraying 2 quarts per acre of a chemical to 1 quart, well, you've just cut your chemical cost in half, and that's very significant for a big farmer. But what has happened over time is those weeds got sprayed with a contact herbicide, and it was not a strong enough dose to kill that weed. And what it did was made that particular weed resistant to that particular chemical. And so, most of the time we're going to want to use the maximum rate. But when it comes to residuals, if you're going to do a double crop in the fall, you want to recognize that there could be some residual carryover that's still there in the fall. And in that case, you probably would not want to use a maximum rate.
Which is why we talk about on permission properties, if a farmer is raising row crop ag, know what he planted, when he sprayed, and have his chemical plan, or else you might be wasting seed, trying to double crop or put stuff in, right after he plows. Talk a little bit about, on a contact herbicide, what is happening to that plant? Does when let's say mist or 1 drop of herbicide makes contact with the plant, does the whole plant die immediately, or does it have to kind of work through the plant?
Well, again, it depends on the chemical or the specific herbicide, but a lot of them are shutting down photosynthesis in that plant, and it's a slow process. So you're not going to spray today and go back in 2 days and all your weeds are going to be brown and wilted and laying on the ground. It could take a couple weeks or so. They'll slowly start to turn yellow and then brown and then fall over or whatever. But shutting down photosynthesis is probably one of the most common ways that these chemicals are working.
So that's the biggest reason that you tell people, if they're working their food plot, to spray it and then wait 10 days to 2 weeks before they till, because if just the top half of that plant is dead, the roots might not be dead, and we just chop up the roots and redistribute them, we might have more weeds after tilling than we did before.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing with the residual herbicide is a lot of those residuals have to be applied before the plant germinates, because once that plant is sprouted and is out of the ground, some residual herbicides can damage or kill those plants. So you need to read the labels. And again, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of chemicals out there. There's no way that any of us knows, all of them and, the fine details about everyone. So you really need to read the label.
Yep. And if you do a Google search on these labels, they're all online. You can find them. You can call an Ag Chem representative. I've actually used Ag Chem Solutions out of Indianapolis. My friends up at Larson Farms, they're sponsored by that company for their YouTube channel, and you can get just about anything from them, and they can ship it to you in 2.5 gallon jugs, or just offer you some advice. But the other big question we get is application rate. And we don't know, because there's so many different concentrations that are sold. But I think the big misconception is, if you have a Roundup Ready soybean, you could take and pour concentrate glyphosate on that plant and it still wouldn't hurt it, because it's tolerant to it. But there are some herbicides that if you mix the wrong way, you can do damage. So there's no rule of thumb for all herbicides. They're all a little bit different.
Yeah. And the other thing that question we get all the time is, people will say, my soybeans have sprouted. They're at the 2-leaf stage. Can I spray glyphosate on them? They think it's going to hurt them. You're never going to hurt that plant with glyphosate if it's glyphosate tolerant, such as real world soybeans are. So again, every crop is different. Every chemical is different. You've got to read the label.
All right, so it's holiday weekend. I guess if we really did a survey across the country, this is probably the most popular weekend for planting spring food plots. We got a little bit of an early start this year in some areas. Some areas they're going at it this weekend. The question that's come up the last 2 days is across the Midwest, it's supposed to turn hot, real hot for the next week. No chance of rain, 8 days. We got an open holiday weekend and people are off work. The people are asking us, do we go ahead and plant knowing it's going to get hot and no rain for 8 days, or do we try to wait?
Plant. The last thing you want to do is, keep postponing your planting date, because the longer you get into the summer, the better the odds that you're going to hit a long dry spell. And, that's where, your planting method is really critical, because, we got a 2-inch rain about 2 weeks ago on the weekend. So we still got some ground moisture. And if you've got a no-till drill where you're not breaking up that soil, there's still some ground moisture down below the surface. And, I planted some soybeans this week and also some grain sorghum, and, it appeared dry as can be, but I know down where I got that seed, there's some moisture in there, and that seed can go ahead and germinate. And, it may germinate and just kind of stall out waiting for a rain. But once that rain happens, it just explodes out of the ground within 24 hours or so. So, we're at the mercy of the weather for sure, but I would strongly encourage everyone to go ahead and plant and, just pray for rain.
The only, I told somebody on the phone 2 days ago, the only big concern that you have in planting when you don't have rain coming for another week is if you're broadcasting, you got to get that seed cover back up. Because if you have 8 days of soybeans laying on top of the ground, birds, and you could have it, if it cracks a little bit, you could have it scorched. So you got to get them covered, cultipacked in soft soil, fence dragged over, get creative. Us food plotters have to work with the tools that we have a lot of times. And, sometimes it's not a drill, but especially when we don't have rain for maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks, getting that seed covered is even more critical than, the rain, really setting the seed when we get a good rain right after planting.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Seed coverage in the spring, especially late spring, is probably one of the most critical times when seed coverage is really important. So Make sure that seed's covered good.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break and listen to the folks from Osseo and come back with a little bit of talk about Miscanthus. You got some good posts and pictures that you posted this week. I want to dive into that just a little bit.
Osseo Gear introduces a premium line of bow hunting gear that is unmatched, pairing nature's finest camouflage with the best technological innovations. Osseo Gear brings whitetail bow hunters the gear they need to be the best at their craft. The unique camouflage mimics the intricate feather pattern of North America's greatest predatory creatures. Designed for invisibility, built for comfort, and engineered for function. Visit OsseoGear.com. That's ASIO Gear.com to start shopping. Osseo Gear. Prepare to be invisible.
All right, Don. Well, 2 days ago, you posted a picture of some Miscanthus coming back, and then you had to do a follow-up post the next day answering so many questions that we got. And if we get a lot of questions about herbicide and food plots, the amount of questions about Miscanthus is about double. From, is my Miscanthus dead, it's not coming up fast enough or uneven, to do I need to burn it, cut it, all kinds of questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just answering those questions, we shut off sales of Miscanthus the 1st of May. So, a lot of people got their Miscanthus and are still planting and have been planting in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And so the questions start rolling in, and very similar to with all our other seeds, do I plant it? Do I wait for a rain? I planted it 10 days ago. I'm not seeing anything. What's wrong? And I had some pictures on my phone that I just thought was timely to answer some miscanthus questions. And one thing is that miscanthus, when it's mature, it's 12, 15 feet tall, and people just don't believe or realize that it can grow that in one growing season. So they think that you plant it year one, the plants come up and they're about 6 inch or 6 feet tall or so. And then the next spring, they start right there at the 6 foot mark, and then they take off and they go to 10 feet. And then the third year, they get up 12, 15 feet. Well, it doesn't work like that. Miscanthus, every year it dies back and it starts at the ground with new growth. And so I shared the first picture was that new growth coming up through last year's dead growth to show that, no, it doesn't start out on the end of the plant. It starts at ground level again each year. And, I noticed after we got that big rain a couple of weeks ago at my place, the miscanthus absolutely exploded. And now it's over my waist. It's probably approaching shoulder high, the stuff that's been established, and looking really good. I did plant some 2 or 3 weeks, probably 2 weeks ago, that I made a post about, and there's just probably less than 5% of those rhizomes are shooting out of the ground. The thing you got to also remember about those rhizomes, it's not like seed. It's not like you go out there and you plant your soybeans and then boom, every soybean seed comes up the same day. Or corn, you look right down the row of corn and every kernel's popped up. With miscanthus, those roots are coming out of dormancy, and they break dormancy at different rates. And some of them will almost come out of the ground immediately, and others, a month later, you still don't see anything, but yet they're still alive and they will show up down the road at some point. So, that first post I made was basically to show people that it starts over at the ground every year, and that old growth will stand right there with the new growth growing right up through it.
Yeah, and one of the questions we get is, do I burn it the first year or second year? That picture that you posted, and I'll find it and have it on the screen as we're talking right now. It's a good visual. As your miscanthus is maturing between year 1 and year 3, you want to leave that old thatch, because that helps with line of sight until the miscanthus is thick enough that 1 year's growth blocks sight. So everybody always asks, do I need to burn my miscanthus year 1 or year 2? And your second post was you were explaining why you burnt year 3. So dive into that just a little bit.
Yeah, I showed a picture that was shared with me by someone who had started burning their miscanthus, and once it got down towards the end, they were afraid that it might jump. There was such a fire, it might jump the fire break they had at the end. So they wetted down the miscanthus and they stopped the fire so it did not burn the entire strip. Well, you can see exactly where that fire burned and where the fire stopped, and where that miscanthus had been burned. You got a good stand of miscanthus. It's probably, I don't know, in that picture it was maybe 18 inches high when that picture was taken. And then past where the fire did not burn, you could barely see green. You still had that brown dead thatch from the previous year. So it was a perfect example of how well that miscanthus will respond to a fire or a burn. Something else to keep in mind is, a new miscanthus planting is susceptible to winter kill, especially during that first year and a little bit the second year, because those roots are not real well established yet. And you get a real cold winter, and it's not so much throughout the South or most of the Midwest, but you start getting into the northern states, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, right. Some of those states, there can be winter kill. Now, and what happens is in those regions, they'll get a real bad cold spell with no snow on the ground to act as an insulation. And that's when it really becomes an issue. But if you can do some things to prevent that. And one of those is throw straw on a new planting. Just go out there and mulch straw over that miscanthus that first year and help insulate those roots if you happen to get a really cold spell. You can also mow and that thatch from the miscanthus itself will be on the ground and inside a little bit. But as that miscanthus gets older and that root system becomes more established, and you start getting some thatch on the ground to protect it from some freezing, then you don't have near the issue with winter kill.
Don, we know that some plants are stimulated by fire, but is there any truth, do you think, that the years that you burn, it stimulates growth because it turns everything black and it heats up a little bit earlier and gets a little bit more jump start? Because, you know, when we look at your switchgrass fields and we burn it and it turns black, it's like a parking lot, you know, with dark color. Does that attract more heat? Do you think that maybe plays a little bit into it, or is it just that it chemically, or the plant just likes to be burned every now and then?
Well, I don't know for certain, but I can tell you that from my experience, the year that you burn, and I got my switchgrass miscanthus plantings are on a 3-year rotation. So a third of it gets burned each year. And the year that a particular patch gets burned, it will be taller and thicker than at any other time. And then the next 2 years when it don't get burned, it's not quite as tall, not quite as thick. And then boom, we come through and burn it again, and there it goes, takes off. I think you bring up some very valid points. I think the fire heating up the ground, I think that black ground absorbing the sun's heat probably warms up that soil a little bit quicker. But I also think the ash, you know, from that burnt miscanthus, you know, put something back in the soil that really benefits the plant. So I think it's a combination of things, but there's absolutely no doubt the year you burn, it'll be the tallest and thickest of any other year.
Yeah. Just a question. I have no idea, but I noticed that on your farm, when we burnt the year after we burned, it always seemed to come back a little bit faster, a little bit bigger. Yep. Before we move on to the listener submitted questions today, our good friend Brandon Epperson hollered at me early in the week and took me down to a property that he's going to be hunting to this year. And, you know, when you started really taking me under your wing and really teaching me the in-depth stuff that you did years ago, I remember one of the lessons that you told me was you have to evaluate each farm as itself. You know, you can't compare two farms together because they're different. But the more importantly, you have to take what each farm is going to give you. And when we were riding around on Brandon's property, it's bigger property, you know, 130, 150 acres. But the topography and the layout basically makes a lot of it just unhuntable because you can't get to it. And I started thinking about how many people would just see deer sign in the back or see deer sign in one spot and feel like they just gotta hunt it. For the people who are new to the podcast, talk a little bit about what you started pounding into my head years ago about just taking what a property gives you. And, you know, we can manipulate deer movement to some degree with food or bedding, but why it's so important not to just worry about having to stand at any spot on the farm.
You know, it's interesting that you bring this up because I was just thinking today, I'm always looking or trying to think of new ideas for videos for the Whitetail Master Academy. And, you know, I'm talking to deer hunters, clients, real world customers every single day. And I get a lot of ideas from those conversations I have with these folks. And I was just thinking today, we've got to make a video and we've got to talk about a property's ceiling. And every property has got a ceiling, and the ceiling is, you know, how big a bucks you can grow. There's some bucks you're never, ever going to grow a 200-inch buck there. There's some you're probably never going to grow a 170-inch buck there. And in some regions of the country, there's probably areas you're never going to grow a 150-inch buck. And I'm going to have to do a video to get people to realize that you can read everything that's out there. You can watch every video on the internet. You can apply all of it, and your ceiling is not going to move. And you can take your property closer to that ceiling because most properties are not at their ceiling today. They're just not managed in such a way. The habitat's maybe not such that they can reach that. They're at that ceiling today. I think most properties, they can be improved to reach that ceiling. But what a lot of land managers don't realize is that there are certain properties that you're just not going to reach the goal that you have. And, when you go onto a property, like one you described, one of the first things you got to recognize is that if you don't have good access to a stand site, you don't have a good stand site. And you might have to give up 75% of your acreage because 75% of your acreage does not have good access. And you're way better off to give it up and let the deer have it, and then bring them to that 25% that you can access really well and kill them there. You're way better off to do that than you are to push yourself to the back regions reaches of that 75%, and all you're doing is pushing the deer off of the property. When you do that, instead let them have it. Let them have the 75% and then pull them to that 25 instead of pushing them clear off where you got no chance at all to kill them. But at the same time, you got to recognize what your property's ceiling is. And I got some really good thoughts that I'm going to share on that video on the Master Academy next time Steve's over and we're doing some filming.
I just got to believe there's two elements to that. There's number one, I agree 100% with you as far as the size antlers of the bucks, but I think you can grow age structure on any property if it's hunted right and set up right. Even with bad neighbors, I think you might not be able to do it consistently, but if you're disciplined, I think the misconception people have is the difference between age structure and getting bucks to older age classes, and then what size those age class antlers are. Those are two different elements that go hand in hand. And if somebody tries to focus on antler size before age structure, I think they're going to miss out.
Well, property layout's huge too, because and the size of the property. I mean, if you got a 40-acre property, it lays out terrible. You may never be able to move bucks to an older age class.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if you've got the right 40-acre property, you might be able to shoot 6.5 and older bucks every year.
Right.
A lot of that's going to depend on.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
A lot of that's going to depend on what's across your property line on your neighbors.
And that's what started this conversation is the first thing you told me is no two properties are ever the same, and take what that property gives you. Don't try to take too much, because when you do that, you're going to end up just pushing deer to your neighbors or on down the holler or wherever. So I think it's a fantastic just thought process, because believe it or not, I think a lot of hunters get access to properties this time of year, and they're going on them right now. They maybe didn't get access in the winter where they could do winter scouting, and they're trying to evaluate where to put stands and stuff right now. So access is everything. We pretty much beat that horse dead every single episode we can. I will tell you though, Don, something, and I think it's because of how we haven't gotten rain for a week here, and I know other areas, my allergies something is up right now everywhere. And I didn't think I was going to get home Tuesday night because my eyes swelled all the way shut. And it was just for riding a side-by-side through a field that, had, waist high grass in it. Something's out there. And I got a call from Kyle Harmon today. He was spraying the property that I have up there by you. And he had an allergic reaction today, and his throat swelled shut. He ended up almost having to go to the emergency room, getting home, getting Benadryl in. And he sent me a picture. He'll kill me if I post it, so I'm not going to. I'll let him do it. But you talk about Kyle looking like the Michelin Man. I mean, his whole face was swelled up and bright red. His nose was wide. I'm glad he got home and got some Benadryl in him, because he said his throat was starting to close up. But something's out there, people, and you all need to be really, really careful of it out working this weekend.
I think it's more than one thing, because I had a sinus headache this afternoon. I mean, probably an hour before we got on here this evening, I took 2 Advil for my headache. There's a lot of pollen out there right now, and I'm pretty sure I know exactly what happened to Kyle. There's a patch of Reed's canary grass that he's got to drive through to that one plot, And I'm telling you what, that is a nasty, nasty patch to drive through. When you drive through there, that pollen is all over your tractor and everything. And if he drove through there and he was not in a cab tractor, that's exactly what happened to him.
He said it happened last year, and I said, "Yep, I think I know what it is." And man, I tell you what, you've had a cab tractor for quite a few years. Last year was my first cab tractor, and I have not been sick since I had a cab tractor. And I used to fight being sick all summer from being out in it. And I have no doubt it's breathing that pollen and that dust. Wish I would have, it's a lot of money, but I wish I would have been able to spring for it years ago. But you can call me a yuppie food plotter if you want. I have not been sick since I had that cab.
Well, I think as you get older, sometimes your allergies bother you more than when you're younger, because I know when I was young, I baled a lot of hay, and I was in the top of many hay lofts and tops of barns stacking hay, and it never bothered me whatsoever. But when I go, I won't hardly feed small bales of hay anymore, because that alfalfa will just tear me up. And there's no way I could work in a barn stacking alfalfa. And, I don't think it's pollen. I just think it's the dust off of that hay. And it just tears me up the older I get. And I never used to have any kind of allergy issues. So,
well, if maybe one piece of advice we give to everybody out working this time of year is keep Benadryl in the truck or the tractor with you, because you get a spot like Kyle had. I'm serious. On Tuesday night, I had to actually hold one eye open with my fingers because they were swelling shut so bad. I almost couldn't drive home. So, maybe not a bad idea for you boys who are out working, especially further away from home or by yourself. We tend to do a lot of things by ourselves and not have anybody with us. Keep some Benadryl in that truck with you.
Good idea.
All right. Well, let's move on to the first question of the night, and I'll throw it up on the screen and you can start with it then.
All right. This one comes from Lyle Bontrager from Monticello, Kentucky. He says, Don, when doing what you are most well known to do, patterning and killing mature bucks, what trail camera data is most important to you? Information from years prior or current in-season information? Thanks, and God bless. Well, Lyle, as we've talked many times, I think I use trail cameras a little bit different than most people. And without a doubt, the previous year's history to me is more important than current information. And the reason I say that is what you're calling current information really is not current unless you've got a cell camera. Most guys just running regular cameras, they're getting pictures, several days after that picture was actually taken. And when you're using previous year's photos, you're taking that information and you're putting yourself in position before a buck does something. So when you're trying to use current information, you're always a step behind. You go out, you check your camera, you see the buck move by in daylight, so you start hunting. Well, he's already moved by in daylight. You've already missed at least one opportunity, maybe your only opportunity. But when you start using that annual data, you're a step ahead of that buck. He comes through the first week in November or whatever. You start hunting the first day of November, in that area where you got his picture in previous years. And that's why I think previous year's data is so much more valuable than current data.
Yeah. I'm going to go a little sideways on Brandon's question here. And it has to do with annual data, but in a different way relative to right now. And this has been a hot topic on a lot of social media posts and forums. And that is monitoring when fawns drop and trying to backdate that to when that doe is in heat. And we haven't really talked about it on the podcast, but without going in on too big of a, spiel, because we want to get to the other questions, how does annual data play into fawns dropping if we see one early, one late, or right at the bell curve right now?
Well, I think we did talk about this a couple of weeks ago or 3 weeks ago or something. Somebody had thrown out that idea, and I think it's just it's one of those deals that sounds good in theory, but I think in practice it's going to be very difficult to utilize that information. And the reason I say that is, so you go out and you find a fawn. Do you know if that fawn is 24 hours old or a week old? Well, right there, you're a week apart. I mean, so, and then the other thing is, how do you know who his mama is? I mean, does don't just sit around and hang out with their fawns. Mother Nature's way of keeping those fawns alive is the doe leaves them. If she has twins, they will be separated, and many times by a couple 100 yards or more, so that if a predator gets one, the odds are it doesn't get both of them. And so how do you know? You find a fawn, you don't know what age it is for sure, and you also have no idea what doe it came from. And anybody that thinks they can go out there, and I've done it as much as anybody. Yeah, there are certain does that you're going to recognize. I've got one on my farm that she's got a little mane on the back of her neck, kind of like Smokey had. And I don't know if that's one of his daughters or what. I assume it's a good chance it is. I can recognize that doe, but when you're hunting a deer herd that's got, or a property that's got 15, 20 does on it, you're not going to tell me that you recognize every doe that comes by. I'm just not buying that. And
where that doe is in November relative to where she dropped her fawn.
Exactly. And when she bred, the odds are good that buck, before she came into heat, the buck that bred her ran her off somewhere totally away from where she typically would spend the fall. And that's where the breeding actually took place. So there's just a lot of holes in that theory that I just don't buy whatsoever. And if guys want to try it and claim it works, good for them. I just don't buy it.
BuyAFarm.com is your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. Now, here is Don Higgins with this week's featured property.
Well, welcome to this week's Buy a Farm segment. I'm joined with Wayne Keller and Don Higgins to talk about a very special property that is available. However, it's not online. So we're going to start with Don. Tee this property up. Tell us a little bit about it, and then Wayne's going to follow you up with how people who want to learn more about it can get in touch with them.
Well, Terry, I know this property very well. I started working with this landowner probably about, I'm going to guess, somewhere between 12, 15 years ago. Consulted on it. When I still had my tree business, I was down there and I planted a bunch of trees on a habitat project. We planted some switchgrass. He's added acreage since then, at least a couple times. I've probably been on the property a minimum of 5 times over the last few years. And so I know it very well. And big property, 700 and some acres. It's really, it could be divided into about 3 different sections if, a buyer and a couple of friends wanted to go in together. It would be really easy for them to kind of divide it themselves. However, the seller does not want to sell just part of it. He wants to sell it all in one tract. And if he can't do that, he's not going to move it. So, but there is good opportunity for a buyer to split it if they would want to later. There's a nice home and buildings on the property. I think it even comes with some farm equipment and a tractor that Wayne can get into a little bit. But on the wildlife side, there's like over a mile of river frontage. I know the seller has a boat launch area on the banks of that river where you could back a boat in. And great catfishing. I don't know what other fish might be in that river, but I know he catches a lot of catfish on that river. Waterfowl, it's in a fantastic waterfowl area. There's some shallow water wetlands that were designed just for waterfowl, and I mean several acres of it. So if a guy was big into waterfowl, the property would fit the bill there. Turkeys everywhere, and then of course white-tailed deer is what he's managed for. And killed some really nice ones there over the years. And, I think from what he's shared with me, the quality has been getting better in recent years as his management of the property's gotten better. So it's a property I know very well. It's close to a town. You're probably within, I'm going to say, less than 3 miles of a Walmart and several restaurants, not that far off of a major interstate. So access to this property would be good for people that are traveling a ways. The home that's on the property would make just a fantastic hunting camp. A really nice home. So, it could be a vacation retreat property as well as a hunting camp. Just several things to do in that area besides the hunting that's fantastic on this property. And I'm sure Wayne can fill in a lot more things that I'm forgetting about.
Yeah, Wayne, tee it up a little bit about where it's at and then how any other details of it and then how people can learn more.
Sure. This property's in Franklin County, Illinois. Like Don said, it does have a very nice home, buildings, and nice workshop. There's another home on it that could be used for a rental. There's also a rental apartment on the property where a caretaker could stay. Just a great property for the hunter. Now, one thing, too, is it's got a lot of lakes on it that could be used for waterfowl hunting, but the owner on this prefers to cultivate the deer hunting rather than the waterfowl. But it would be very easy to do that because that portion lays separate from a lot of the wooded area. And so it'd be a great waterfowl property or deer hunting. And as far as the machinery goes, this isn't a bunch of junk machinery. This is some real nice stuff that goes with it. There's a 100-horse tractor. There's a smaller John Deere tractor, both of them with bush hogs and loaders. There's ATVs. There's four-wheelers, all kinds of machinery to go with it. And just a quality property. And one thing the owner has told me, he said since Don took over the management, he said it's just unbelievable how the hunting has improved on it since then.
Okay.
And anyway, as far as looking at the property, he'd just as soon not put it out there to where the whole neighborhood knows about it being for sale. But if anybody's interested in a 730-acre tract, well, give me a call and I can email them a link to a web page we have set up with photographs, the information, maps, and I'll have some drone footage available shortly for it.
Yeah, so there is a website for it. It's just not on open to the public. And so in other words, unless somebody sends you a link, you're not going to be able to find it. So, well, Wayne, thanks for coming on. We appreciate you being on the podcast. Why don't you give your number and contact info to end it here? And once again, thanks for supporting Don and I and all the family of Chasing Giants that listen to the show every week.
Glad to be with you. And I can be reached, cell or text at 618-407-1679, or you can go to wkeller@buyafarm.com.
All right. You have a good evening. Travel safe, and we'll catch you in a couple weeks.
This one comes from Brandon McDaniel from Flemingsburg, Kentucky. It says, Don and Terry, I recently saw a post where Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife sent a survey out on doe management, asking opinions on how to increase doe harvest. One option was to gain an extra buck tag if you tagged X number of does. What do you think about this approach for management in a one buck state? Are you aware of any other states that do this or have done this before? I think it could work if the second buck tag was late season and archery only. Thanks for the podcast each week. Brandon, I'm not familiar with any other state that might be doing this. Personally, I don't like the idea whatsoever. When you do that, I think if you give people an extra buck tag for shooting, say, 2 does, I'm telling you, every deer hunter out there is going to shoot 2 does or claim to shoot 2 does. I'm not sure how Kentucky works if they have a check station. I don't think they do. Do you call them in, or so you call them in? So guess what? Everybody's calling in. Yep, I shot a doe tonight. Yep, I shot another one tomorrow morning, and boom, they got their second buck tag. You might as well just forget it because, well, there's just a lot of people that don't have the integrity to do things and play by the rules in all aspects of life. I hate to say it about fellow deer hunters, but they're just a reflection of society in general. And there's a lot of them that are just going to work the system to shoot an extra buck. The honest guy is the one that is punished. So I'm not a big fan of that. Now, one thing you did say that I do like is you said that second buck tag would have to be killed in the late season with archery gear. That would probably eliminate some of the issues, but I'm not sure I like it at all. And one of the reasons I picked this question is because my old buddy Terry, he's a Kentucky deer hunter, and this is something that would affect him personally and not me. So I figured he would have something to say about this.
Let's just say that I went off on a pretty good, about 6-page essay back to the DNR when this came my way. And I didn't stop there because I applied for a Bobcat permit, and it had an open comment section with unlimited text that could be typed in. So I used that opportunity to express my displeasure with the idea, and also the changes to supplemental feeding that they've now done in Kentucky. I was really disappointed with them cutting out the opportunity for us to feed right now, but then they let us hunt over bait. Absolutely just complete backwards, in my opinion. I know that culturally that states like Kentucky and Ohio, you hunt over corn piles, and that's accepted. And I'm not getting into that's right or wrong, but the fact that they'll let you hunt over a corn pile, but they won't let you feed supplemental feed in the spring while these does are pregnant and the bucks are growing is just absolutely ridiculous in my perspective. But then if they try to go back to a 2-buck state, high-powered rifles over bait, mark my words, it will be the demise of our deer herd in the state of Kentucky. You can't have all three. You can't have high-powered rifles. You can't have rifle season during the rut, and you can't hunt over bait and allow 2 bucks to be shot. Not gonna work.
Yeah, it amazes me that the value that a well-managed deer herd with good age structure and good sex ratios between the bucks and does, how much value that brings to a state, and yet how few states really capitalize on it. I think Iowa is probably the only one that I would say tries to capitalize on their deer herd. The others just abuse it. And I don't know if it's all politics, if some of these biologists from some states have enough power to, change the regulations in a way to improve the quality of a deer herd. But and the other thing that amazes me is that deer hunters are so not self-centered, or so short-sighted that they want to make it as easy as possible. And when they do they realize they're making it as easy as possible for every deer hunter out there, and it's going to affect the deer herd that they are hunting? Kind of frustrating, but I've fought that battle many years in Illinois. I give up. I don't care what the state does anymore. I'm going to manage my property the way I want to, and about all I can do.
Yeah. I'm really not happy right now with my state. I can tell you that. I mean, it's the only thing that they could do that make it even worse is go crossbow friendly the entire hunting season and allow crossbows on opening weekend of first weekend of September. I mean, then you're basically, I don't know, just people, you can't make it that open, that easy, that many, and expect your state to be able to grow age structure. It can't happen. So something's got to give.
Hey everyone, Don and I wanted to take a quick break to do a favor for a really good friend of ours. We don't normally do this on the podcast, but our friends at Cranford Manufacturing, they've been a big supporter of the podcast, Lester's Feet, and just been dear friends of Don and I for a long time. We got a message from them this week, and they have decided to sell the company. So they asked if we would read a statement on here, and maybe if someone is looking to get into the outdoor industry, this might be something that you would be interested in. But I'm going to read this short little email, and if you have any questions, please reach out to them. Hey, Don and Terry, Rodney Bell and I have come to the point that we're going to sell Cranford Manufacturing Incorporated. Cranford will celebrate 50 years in business, made in the USA, January of 2024. Cranford has long been recognized the best screw-in tree steps and hunting accessories in the business. Cranford is established with major distributors, dealers, and website sales. This business would be a great fit for a company addition to someone who is already in the manufacturing of metal goods or standalone 1- and 2-man operation for someone with machining or stamping experience. If you're interested, please reach out to Dennis at easyclimb.com. That's DENNIS at EZYCLIMB.com. Serious inquiries only, and if you're interested, please reach out to Dennis. Thanks.
This one comes from Dan Schultz from Brillion, Wisconsin. It says, thank you, Don and Terry, for your hunting and habitat insight and your willingness to be open with your faith. My question is for Don. On several prior podcasts, you have answered questions regarding hunting regulations, your opinion of the Illinois DNR, and other related topics, and given your opinions on how these deer herds should be managed. However, I don't remember ever hearing your goal for a specific deer herd and its end state. Can you please explain more in depth what you think these DNR agencies should be managing for? For example, age structure, deer population numbers, trophy opportunities. Would your goal be to manage for a more mature herd to allow more trophy opportunities and make Illinois a more desired destination hunting state? Thank you for taking the time to answer my question, and God bless. Well, Dan, I guess your timing was perfect considering what we was just talking about on the last question. My goal for my home state, and really for any state, would be that it's managed for a population level that's acceptable for much of the human population. So you're never going to make everybody happy. Farmers want every deer dead. Hunters want a deer behind every tree. Neither one of those are reality. We need to find a population level that is acceptable to the majority of the human population. And I think most people want some deer anyway. So you want to maintain a decent population level, but that population level should have deer in every age class. A lot of states, they just get hammered. The state of Michigan, where I sit right now, the young deer just get hammered to the point that very few of them ever reach maturity. So I think they need to manage for age structure, and then they need to manage for sex ratios. In most states where hunters are just free to shoot whatever they want, the buck kill is going to far exceed the doe harvest. And I think we need to bring those in line, and that can definitely be done through hunting regulations. They could balance out that herd to 50-50 if they wanted to, or they could make it 60% doe harvest and 40% bucks. But it always seems to be the other way around. The bucks seem to dominate the harvest in just about every state that I've ever seen. So, I'd like to balance out the sex ratios. I'd like to have a better age structure, and then I'd like to have the population of the deer herd acceptable to much of the human population.
All right. Great answer. I don't think you'd ever really gone into that I remember either. So I'm glad that question.
That's why I picked that question. That was a good question. Something I had never covered.
Okay.
The next one comes from Patrick Shetty from Oskaloosa, Iowa. He says, Don, looking for your thoughts on purchasing a new hunting farm. Just wondering your must-have list and what you feel is more important. How the farm lays out, hunting pressure in surrounding neighborhoods, access from multiple directions. What would you put higher on the list? A great neighborhood where like-minded neighbors allow more bucks to get older, or a farm with great access and layout and not worry about surrounding hunting pressure? Worried about losing a lot of bucks on neighboring properties? Thanks for the input, and God bless the entire team at Real World and Chasing Giants. Patrick, I think you're way better off to have a property that lays out good with good access. I've consulted on a lot of properties in areas such as Iowa, where Decatur County, Iowa, for example. I've done several consulting visits there. It's a county where almost every property is being managed for big deer. I think it is very difficult for a single landowner in a situation like that to consistently produce big bucks on his property, because basically you got every landowner in that area doing the very same thing. They're all planting extensive food plots. They've all got sanctuaries on their property. They've all got enhanced bedding cover, whether it be their timber has had an aggressive harvest and TSI program, or they've got switchgrass plantings or whatever. Every property's got the same thing. It is way easier to take a property that lays out fantastic, has good access from multiple directions, and it can be surrounded by areas that are just pounded to death, because you know what happens? Your property, if you got that property, it sticks out like a sore thumb in the eyes of the deer. It's just a magnet. It is so much better than the properties around it, that any buck that lives to maturity is going to recognize that, and he's going to want to spend his time on your property. When all your neighbors have the very same thing, they've got low pressure property, they've got food, they've got security, they've got everything a buck would need, it is way, way harder. And I know everybody wants to flock to places like Iowa, and there's some giant bucks in Iowa, and they're there because of people doing things right. But you think about it, one giant buck in Iowa in one of those counties like I just mentioned, how many different farms is that buck on? What's the odds of one farm in an area like that consistently producing year after year? Now, if it's a big farm, sure. I know there's guys out there that own bigger properties, and they lay out in such a way, and they're doing such a good job managing those farms that they are consistently killing good deer out there. But I think it's a lot harder to do it that way when everybody around you is doing the same thing than it is to be different. To have a good property it really doesn't even matter where it's at. I would take a good property in, say, Illinois or Indiana, for example, that is set up right, lays out right, surrounded right, and has good access, because I know I can suck the best bucks from my neighborhood onto my property. And that's something that when all the neighbors are doing the same thing, it's really hard to get a buck to just focus on your property. He's just got so many options. It makes it way more difficult. So layout of the property and access points is way more important than being in a neighborhood where all the neighbors are doing the same thing.
All right. Well, the last question of the night is going to be circling back to a question from last week, where someone asked us about a professor or a doctor at I believe it was University of Tennessee, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
And his theory on mowing clover. So we got a new question from a different person this week, and when he submitted the question, he started the question with a summary of bullet points of what this professor said his idea was, and then asked the question. But when I made the screen that I'm going to share, I flip-flopped that. So you're going to be able to see the question that he asked, and then the bullet points of what the professor is saying to do. So Don, I don't know how you want to set this up or tee this up, but this is kind of a continued dialogue from last week's question.
Yeah, and the reason I picked this question is because there was so much pushback on my answer last week. I know on YouTube there were some comments disagreeing. I seen them on Facebook, and I got personal messages, and then we got this question submitted, and I thought it was worth revisiting and throwing a couple other ideas out. So this one comes from Kyle Rentmeester from River Falls, Wisconsin. He says, this is a summary I took of a podcast with Dr. Craig Harper. His trail cam says they took on a trial, showed 50% less use with the clover mowed multiple times. You are saying the opposite. How is a guy supposed to plan his summer plots with two respected guys saying the exact opposite of each other? And in the summary from the podcast that he mentioned with Dr. Craig Harper, says only mow one time midsummer. Clover grows from top up, most tender. Grass grows from bottom to top. 50% reduction in deer use, 50% less available forage. Routine mowing promotes weeds. Mow one time per year in August before weed seeds. Apply clethodim grass control end of August and in May. Be careful not to spray and kill chicory. Spray 2 times per year clethodim. So Kyle and everybody else that took issue with my answer last week, where I suggested mowing your clover plots about once a month. Guys, I whatever question I answer on here, my answer is not based on something I read on the internet. Everything I answer is based on my own firsthand experience. In my own firsthand experience, I have seen clover plots that have been managed the way that is described here and only mowed once a year. I've been to them on clients' properties. I've seen them in multiple states, numerous clover plots, and they are just a weedy mess that the deer don't even appear to be spending much time in. I will continue to mow my clover plots just as I have for years. One thing I noted was that this particular person is suggesting that you spray clethodim on your clover plots twice a year. Guys, I'm telling you, in all the years, like 30 years now, I've been, planting food plots, including clover plots. I can count on one hand the number of times I've sprayed my clover. I mow them, and that mowing keeps the weeds down. And then just about every year, every other year, in early spring, I will frost seed more seed onto that clover plot to fill in any, patches where the clover's died out to keep that plot, full and lush. And it's that mowing that promotes new growth that the deer really like. And once that plant goes to seed, it loses a lot of its nutrient value and thus its attraction to deer. And, clethodim is not going to kill your broadleaf weeds. That is basically the only way to address your grass problem in your clover. But, the broadleaf weeds mowing is hands down the best way to take care of that. You mentioned you got to be careful not to kill your chicory. Mowing doesn't hurt your chicory whatsoever. Clethodim doesn't either. It's when you got to spray for them broadleaves. So here's what I would like to say to everybody listening to this who don't know who to believe, me or some of the information on the internet. If you've got a clover plot, go out there and mow, follow my advice, and mow half of your plot once a month for the entire summer, stopping about the 1st of September. And from the 1st of September, then you let it go without mowing clear into the winter until the next spring. Each spring, go in there and seed at about half rate of what you would plant a new clover plot. About 5 pounds of seed per acre each spring in March. And come back in 2 or 3 years and tell me, and then the other half of your plot, you just mow it once a year. And then you come back and tell me in 3 years what your clover plot experience was, which way you think is better. We get a lot of questions here that are submitted that never get answered. And the reason that some of those don't get answered is because I don't have any firsthand experience. I'm not going to share information on this podcast that I took off of somebody else's, website or video on the internet or whatever. I'm sharing what's worked for me firsthand. It's not passed down. It's going directly from me who did it to you, the listener. And I hope you guys realize that what I say may go against some of the things you see on the internet, but without a doubt, what I'm sharing is firsthand. It's not secondhand. Didn't come from anybody else. I've seen it with my own 2 eyes. And that's why I believe that mowing your clover about once a month is the best maintenance you can do for a clover plot.
You search the internet good enough, you'll find 2 people that have a difference of opinion on any subject you want. But
yep.
I don't know. I don't know what to tell people. Do it both ways and try it yourself, I guess. I mean, whatever. It's like sometimes people are genuinely asking questions because they're confused and they want to know. And then sometimes I think people are asking questions just to stir controversy or get us to call people out, and we're just not going to bite on that. All we can do is people don't understand the years of testing that you've put into all of this, owning a seed food plot company and doing the things that you have in the outdoor industry. So I'm sorry that it doesn't align with a university's test, but if you go back and look at university tests, you can pretty much find a university test that says just about anything on any subject.
And this approach really carries right on over to real world and the products we put out. You know, people think that we're just saying that NutriCrave corn is different because we want to sell corn. No, we're putting our reputation on the line. If test it, you know, if you want to prove me wrong, you got to at least make an effort to put forth, you know, go plant your own, plant it side by side with something else, send in your own analysis, and then tell me I'm wrong. Don't tell me I'm wrong just because some other guy on the internet says something different. It's all firsthand experience that I'm sharing here.
And I think Kyle's coming at it from an honest, just how do I decide what to do? I really think that's what Kyle does. And Kyle, honestly, if you're that torn, do it both ways and see for yourself.
Right.
So anyway, so what do you got planned here the rest of the holiday weekend and this coming week, Don?
Well, I'm going to be home here at the end of the weekend, and then I'm going to mow hay this week. I got put some hay up for my cows, and my habitat work's just about done. You know, I did just about everything that I could this spring. Got some tree plantings going in this fall after the crops are harvested. Spoke with Jay Gingrich about a major tree planting of some big oak trees. I'm going to plant about 160 big burlapped oak trees on the new 40 that I just acquired. I'm going to be taking it easy this summer, to be honest. After I get that hay put up, I don't have much on my radar except a meeting with you on the 12th with Real World, and I got grandsons that both have birthdays coming up in the next couple months, and I'm spending time with them and the family.
Well, I got the last of the sweet corn planted. We're planting sweet corn in 6 different times through the spring. So the last few rows of sweet corn, we're trying not to have everything come on at one time this year and have it spread out. So that's done. I'm going to go check the food plots tomorrow. For the people who are wondering when I spray my soybeans, I'll wait till they get up about 10 inches tall or so before I spray. If I spray after first germination, even though I might have weeds in it, you'll have to end up spraying again. So it'll be a little while before I spray anything again. But I don't know. Oh, I get probably either Sunday afternoon or Monday, we're going to sight in my new 300 Blackout. So that'll be fun.
Awesome. Well, you got to be prepared.
There you go. I'll show it to you for the people who are watching on YouTube. So I don't think I showed it after it was completely built, but it's got the light laser, the Vortex AMG on the top of it. So I'm excited to get that one dialed in. That's going to be the new truck gun. So I'm sure we'll get flagged by YouTube now after talking about that and showing that on here. But yeah, that'll be fun. We get to do that this weekend, and then I'm on the road all next week. So.
Well, summer's here.
Summer's here. We hope that everybody has a really good holiday weekend this weekend. Time with family and friends is just so special. The older we get, Don talked about it a couple of weeks ago, the more we kind of value that and regret the time that we didn't invest in that early in our lives. So I hope people are really focusing on that this weekend.
Amen. Spend some time with your family.
All right, everybody. Thanks for the support. We really appreciate it.
God bless. Have a great week.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by Osseo Camo, BioFarm Real Estate Company, 360 Hunting Blinds, Victory Chevrolet, Real World Wildlife Products, Matthews Archery, Novix Tree Stands, Gingerich Tree Farm, WildlifeFarming.com, Quiet Cat, and Vortex Optics. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.